Generally, with the controversies I've covered on this channel, the people I talk about are aged in their 20s, maybe sometimes 30s. But I don't think there are that many controversies surrounding perpetrators who are actually minors. Generally, the people who are creeps or weirdos tend to be adults, and even generally the bullies and the doxers are at least over 18 years old. Another factor to consider when we're talking about this specific controversy is that this controversy involves the Dave and Bambi community, which, while apparently disliked by some people for toxicity and immaturity, has been generally controversy-free. And that's where we get to BombasticHype. BombasticHype is a Filipino guy, well known for his contributions to many FNF projects, such as Fun-Sized Witty Mod, Triple Phone Breakers, Fun-Sized Ron and Bob, Dave and Bambi Shipping Cute Sprites, Golden Apple Edition, and many more. He also has a YouTube channel with over 100,000 subscribers. His list of transgressions is extensive, spanning at least a year of lying, harassment, bullying, and manipulation. It's astounding how much ground he's managed to cover in terms of trying to ruin the lives of other people. And keep in mind, he's only 15 years old. When I was that age, I was playing Minecraft with my friends, not doxing my significant other or threatening people who were mildly mean to me. The majority of the evidence I have comes from two sources. The primary one is a Google Doc posted by a Twitter user named Wugalex, who was one of the victims of BombasticHype. This doc has now been deleted but saved as a PDF. The secondary source is a different Google Doc that provides a little more context for some of these things. Bear in mind that throughout this, it has been incredibly difficult to scrounge up information, as a lot of the evidence has been miraculously scrubbed off the internet, and even the good old Wayback Machine isn't helping to restore them for some reason. As such, take a lot of what I say with a grain of salt. However, there is still a lot of proof backing up the claims against BombasticHype, or Keith, as I will now call him. As always, harassing anyone mentioned in this video is a bad idea, so don't do it. Sending death threats isn't going to get you anywhere. Now let's get into it. Since there are three primary controversies surrounding Keith that involve him harassing three different people, I think it would be best to start by talking about some of his miscellaneous and less focused actions. Keith was a member of a private Discord server called Project Swirl, which was apparently a place where members would express their hypersexuality and partake in sexual activities with other members in the server. The document shows quite a few images of Keith sending art of his OCs having sex with one another, and sometimes other people's OCs. It is a little bit graphic, so I don't want to linger on this for too long. The document goes so far as to say that the drawings were CP, which I personally wouldn't go as far to claim as such. The pictures don't actually resemble any real children. However, it is still strange for a 15-year-old to have drawn them. Furthermore, apparently some of these drawings depicted self-cest, which is where a person conducts sexual activity with an alternate version of themselves. Though it's hard to be certain because these images have already been censored, some of these images may depict Keith doing something inappropriate with himself. On a much more revolting note, there was a time when Keith requested his boyfriend at the time, Villazon, to send audio recordings of him softly kissing his pillow, which clearly had sexual intent behind it. Keith proceeded to download these recordings, all 13 of them, and post them on Project Swirl without Villazon's consent. It's never stated in the document, nor can I find any info about Project Swirl, but it's entirely possible that some of the members of this Discord server were over the age of 18, which means that it is entirely possible that Keith may have genuinely distributed sexual recordings of a 14-year-old to adults, which is vile. Keith also wasn't the best person in his own Discord server either. He frequently turned a blind eye to people saying the F and N slurs, despite them being allegedly against his own server rules. Keith himself has also said the F slur on at least one occasion. While you could argue that, as a gay man, Keith should be allowed to say that word, back when he said it, he was allegedly identifying as a straight woman, meaning it was taboo at that point of his life. That's all of the miscellaneous issues covered, so now we can move on to the 3 case studies, where Keith tormented 3 separate individuals for very little discernible reason. I just want to say for the rest of this video, there's a minor trigger warning for emotional abuse and mentions of self-harm and suicide. Continue at your own discretion. BabyBlueSEYT is a known member of the Dave and Bambi community and a contributor to a couple of D&B themed mods. Some proof can't be provided here because, as stated by BabyBlue, most of the evidence was from a previously deleted Discord account. From March to November 2021, Baby Blue had been groomed and manipulated by a modder she does not wish to name, and she claims that for this 8-month period, and from then onwards, Keith and other friends treated her poorly. Baby Blue alleges that Keith would often scream at her, either through text or voice calls, which was a major trigger due to the emotional trauma from the previously mentioned grooming incident. Even in the venting channel of Keith's Discord server, when Baby Blue was trying to rationalize her situation, Keith and her friends continued to lambast her with no consideration for her mental health. When confronted about it, Keith allegedly just told Baby Blue to ignore it. Eventually, Baby Blue separated herself from these people and left the Discord server. And now in this story, we should introduce this new character named Zoe the Catboy. While Zoe and Keith weren't exactly on the best of terms initially, they soon both decided to gang up on Baby Blue and mercilessly harass her. The harassment included, but was not limited to, making fun of Blue's mental health, guilt-tripping Blue by claiming that Keith was harming himself because of her, manipulating Blue to stay whenever she wanted to leave chats or voice calls, Zoe privately verbally abusing Blue with threats of banning her if she ever told anyone, and mocking Blue for calling someone out for saying the N slur. Keith also gave Zoe a special therapist role on his Discord server, which apparently signified that person as someone who could raise morale or lift people's spirits, despite fully knowing what they were doing to Blue. Keith also liked to openly discuss his theory with Zoe and others in his own server, that Blue was actually just faking his mental health issues for attention and sympathy, which is certainly an audacious claim to make about someone who was born with autism and was groomed for 8 months. Of course, this was all done in a disgusting bid to make Blue feel even more helpless. Eventually, Zoe apologized to Blue. However, Blue did not forgive them. Instead, Blue gave Zoe the rightful dressing down they deserved, listing off all the things Zoe did and the long-term effects they had on Blue's health and well-being, and really drilling in how despicable it was for Zoe to manipulate people into bullying a mentally vulnerable teenager. While Keith was involved in a lot of the harassment, Baby Blue states that Keith's main crime was inaction, as he let Zoe and others harass Blue with no consequence whatsoever. Furthermore, after Blue started receiving therapy, Keith allegedly refused to allow Blue to talk about it on his Discord server, in order to further the narrative that Blue was faking his mental issues. Another incident occurred in mid-June 2022. This is about a person involved with the Dave and Bambi Golden Apple mod, named T5 Emplar, to whom I will now refer as T5, who was apparently close friends with Keith. Keith allegedly brought a select few people, which included Baby Blue, into a private group chat to discuss some personal info about T5. Blue believed that T5 wouldn't have been comfortable with what was being discussed, so he DM'd T5 about it, to which T5 requested that Blue add them to the group chat. Blue was under the impression that T5 and Keith were super close friends, so he did what he was told and brought T5 into the chat. Keith responded by kicking both T5 and Blue out of the group chat and angrily berating the latter in DMs. Keith mentions that T5 told me not to tell anyone about it, in reference to the private information Keith was sharing, which means that Keith was angry at someone else, Baby Blue, even though what he himself did was wrong from the very beginning. And this brings us to March 17th of 2023, when T5 contacted Keith about Blue, where Keith essentially states that if Blue writes an expose about Keith, which, spoiler alert, is where I'm getting my info from right now, then Keith will bring Zoe and Kodomodachi to his side to support him. Yeah, I don't think your trump card should be using the testimony of a manipulator and a known child groomer, bud. So to the people who think this is just a petty drama about a couple of people shouting at a guy and shunning him from a Discord server, you are flat out wrong. This is persistent emotional abuse deliberately targeted towards a vulnerable person who is in no condition to fight back, all instigated by Mr. BombasticHype and his posse. I think shameless bullying is a little too intense, so how about we just move on to some simple deception instead. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Project Z. Project Z is a social networking app where you can connect with millions of people worldwide and find people you share common interests with anywhere, anytime. Use the circles function to find communities which suit your interests. You can chat, roleplay, post art, and even do video calls with people and make new friends. And yes, there are many circles for Friday Night Funkin', so have fun. Join live parties to chat with people from all over the world on whatever topics you want. What also makes this platform stand out is that Project Z has a neat little economy where you can collect coins you can use to buy cool cosmetics like videos, art, and animated profile pictures. You can download Project Z from the App Store or Google Play Store, or you can click on the link in the description. And when you sign up, be sure to use the invitation code INTROV to connect with my account. Now back to the video. If the previous segment didn't tell you this much, the next situation demonstrates Keith's desperate need for revenge against anyone who says anything mildly against him, no matter how petty. In mid-February of 2023, Wugalex, a Dave and Bambi dev, tweeted out saying he didn't want to interact with any BombasticHype supporters due to harassment. The next day, Keith told Wugalex that people were now harassing him by Twitter DMing him art of Keith's OC being killed by Wugalex's OC trickery, along with images of real-life self-harm. Angered that someone would harass Keith, Wugalex demanded that Keith show these disgusting images. Keith responded 8 hours later by saying he found the image, but not the person who sent it, which is strange. Wugalex immediately recognized the art style as something they had seen before on the Dave and Bambi Golden Apple Discord server. 7 minutes later, Keith sent what was apparently a second harassment image by the same person. Suspicious that Keith was tricking him, Wugalex decided to investigate the images by cross-referencing them with other drawings of trickery made by Keith, and came to the conclusion that Keith had drawn these images in order to pretend that he was being harassed. When further questioned, Keith suddenly claimed to have found the harasser's Twitter account, but was hesitant to reveal their name. Eventually, Keith posted a screenshot of the DMs, which included the name of the harasser, but conveniently cut off the time and date from when the DMs were sent, which is usually displayed underneath the message. Conveniently 5 minutes later, Keith claimed that the harasser had started sending gory images again, which Keith proceeded to send to Wugalex while still omitting the timestamps of the messages. When asked about the timestamps for the DMs, Keith grew defensive and made a multitude of excuses not to reveal any more information. Wugalex did a bit more digging and discovered that the harasser's account was made at 9:55 AM, which was almost 10 hours after Keith first claimed to be harassed, and just 10 minutes before Keith showed his DMs, basically confirming that the harasser was fake and made on the fly with no plans whatsoever. A week later, Wugalex, along with T5, confronted Keith about faking the harassment against himself. Keith vehemently denied the allegations and tried to play dumb despite the situation being very obvious. Keith then contradicts himself by saying the gore images were initially sent by Discord, despite earlier saying they were sent from Twitter DMs. But then 10 minutes later, he changes his story completely by admitting that he deliberately sent Wugalex fake harassment images in order to scare him. But Keith said that he didn't make any of them, and was just the messenger for someone who wanted to bully Wugalex, despite it being proven earlier that the drawings sent bore a striking resemblance to Keith's own drawings of trickery. Anyway, Keith sent a screenshot of DMs he claims to have had with a real harasser named Gemzy Not Found. Essentially, this Gemzy Not Found person convinced Keith to go along with a plan to send harassment images to Wugalex. Keith claims that he was uncomfortable with the arrangement, though it's weird that he never thought at any point to just refuse to go along with the plan. Suspicious, Wugalex requested Keith to add Gemzy to the current group chat, which he did. Conveniently, only a few minutes after Keith stopped talking in this group chat, Gemzy suddenly became active and started sending messages in the chat. Weirdly, they were speaking in a different way than they did in the DMs with Keith, almost as though someone was trying to make their wording style distinct from someone else. Gemzy spammed a few gory images and then went offline, and then some minutes later, Keith came back online and started messaging. Kinda suspicious that neither Keith or Gemzy are active in the chat at the same time, isn't it? Keith finally apologized for sending the messages, to which Wugalex responded by saying they disliked Keith significantly more now. Later, Keith proceeded to block Wugalex on both Twitter and Discord, with Wugalex believing that all of this shows that he is trying to run away from the problem, rather than face what he agreed on doing and tried to let himself and this anonymous person get away with what they had done. As you can probably tell from what I've discerned, I personally believe there's a chance this Gemzy Not Found person was made up by Keith, with quite a bit of evidence to support this. This is an incident where Keith attempted to deceive someone else into thinking that he himself was receiving threats in order to make someone else feel bad. But you would think even Keith here has standards. You would think he wouldn't harass and try to cancel his own boyfriend, right? Well, let's look into that. MugAnimate, or Mug for short, is another YouTuber who is closely associated with Friday Night Funkin', mainly known for animations he created relating to the Bob mod, and was at one point good friends with BombasticHype, being in his YouTube group at one point and a close friend of his. Prior to August of 2022, while Mug and Keith were still close friends, Keith suddenly asked Mug to be his boyfriend. However, at the time, Keith was already in a relationship with Villazin. Mug pointed this out, to which Keith responded by saying he was okay with polyamorous relationships. However, it seems that there was some sort of miscommunication, as Villazin himself was actually not okay with the arrangement. So shortly after, Keith broke up with Villazin. What followed was a long and toxic relationship between Keith and Mug. Keith was not afraid of leveraging his position over others he thought were more vulnerable. On at least one occasion, Keith drew NSFW art of himself and Mug, which, unlike the OC art on Project Swirl, could possibly classify as actual abuse material. And similar to what he had done with Villazin, Keith requested Mug send him audio recordings of him kissing his pillow, which he had then masturbated to and bragged about in the Project Swirl server. Whenever Mug felt uncomfortable and tried to end the relationship, Keith would guilt trip and manipulate him into staying by threatening to kill himself. Eventually, in September of 2022, Keith finally decided to break up with Mug, but did so by publicly announcing the end of their relationship in his Discord server, despite the relationship having been fairly private before, and Mug having wanted to have it stay that way. Keith also allegedly revealed a multitude of out-of-context DMs he had with Mug that apparently proved that Mug was transphobic and homophobic. The former I can't find any evidence of due to pretty much everything being deleted, and 99% of the evidence relying on a single deleted tweet that I can't restore. And the latter is so ridiculous seeing as Mug himself is in a relationship with another guy. Keith also claims that Mug forced himself into the relationship between Keith and Villazin, and was the reason why they fell apart. All of this led to a wave of harassment against Mug, and led to him being isolated from most others in the community. Sometime later in October, Keith called Mug into a voice call on Discord and showed himself pointing a gun at his head. However, the gun was not loaded. Although Keith did not harm himself in this little stunt, it ended up traumatizing Mug for months as, despite the issues between them, Mug still worried for Keith's health. This can be interpreted as another guilt-tripping tactic by Keith to threaten Mug to stay quiet about his side of the story. Keith also openly mocked Mug for an apparent suicide attempt with a meme image, as well as drawing art of different OCs eating Mug's corpse. We also get to see Keith deliberately isolate Mug from his peers, as seen in the screenshot where he tries to investigate whether or not two anonymous people have been speaking to Mug on WhatsApp, presumably wanting to force them to end contact. Even worse is that in December of 2022, Keith allegedly doxed Mug by revealing his full name and apparently his whole family tree, which led to some moron contacting Mug's school for the fun of it. Fortunately, the school was understanding of Mug's situation and suspended him so he could take a mental health break. Eventually people realized that BombasticHype was the one in the wrong in the situation, which led to Keith essentially admitting that he was deliberately drumming up false controversies against Mug, as well as creating an apology to address other issues such as the NSFW art and audio recordings. This apology was supposed to go public as a YouTube community post on Keith's channel. However, he decided to hold off on this as, in his own words, the only stuff that got out was the transphobia and homophobia. Keith later claimed that he apologized personally to Mug in a Discord voice call with an unnamed witness present, for what it's worth. From an outsider's perspective, many of Keith's actions are horrific. He requested sexual content from minors and shared them to other people, participated in the merciless harassment of a mentally vulnerable kid, tried to scare someone with gore and fake threats, and even doxed and attempted to cancel his own supposed boyfriend. In some instances, Keith leveraged his authority and power to manipulate and harass people he perceived as more vulnerable than himself, but then in other instances, he bullies people for the sake of petty revenge. The list of transgressions is so extensive that it's hard to believe this all stems from a 15-year-old boy. However, it is ultimately up to the victims or whether or not they forgive him. You must respect the decisions of the victims. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.